Hi everyone, I'm Lily Sheffo, and myself, Genesis Shaw, Heath Morgan, and Kobe Worrell. We are assigned the Self-Fulfilling Misperceptions of Public Polarization by Douglas J. Aller, from the University of California, Berkeley. It was originally published in the Journal of Politics, Volume 76, Number 3, on May 12, 2014.
Self-fulfilling misperceptions of public polarization addresses the problem of the misperceptions of public polarization. We should care about this issue because it affects the way people in our country view politics and each other. Polarization makes people less likely to work with those who disagree with them, and when we see others as more extreme than they are, it only breeds more polarization as we distance ourselves from them. The article focuses on the fact that the mass media convey deep divisions among citizens despite scant evidence for such ideological polarization. Mass media portrays our country as deeply divided into extreme liberal and conservative ideologies. In reality, people are much more moderate than they are told they are. People tend to overestimate both the liberalism of liberals and the conservatism of conservatives. Evidence from other research, such as from Brady and Snyderman, show that in the 1972 and 1976 ANES, respondents identified left-leaning groups as much more liberal on issues than they really were. They also found that respondents were able to more accurately identify conservative positions. This second finding was contrary to their hypothesis that citizens would misperceive extremism and polarization in both groups, but this has changed since then. Citizens now also perceive conservative political groups as more extreme because of conservative elites becoming more extreme. When citizens see political elites become more extreme, they then view the average liberal or conservative as more extreme as well. This, combined with the media using polarization narratives, causes people to overestimate polarization and extremism. Pluralistic ignorance. People falsely believe that others have similar extreme values, even though they all have more moderate views. This causes people to be more willing to accept extreme values as a norm. The first hypothesis of the study is misperceived mass polarization. Citizens tend to overestimate the extremity of their peers' political positions. They overestimate the liberalism of liberals and the conservatism of conservatives. This is addressed in Study 1. The second hypothesis is the consequences of overestimating public polarization. Overestimating polarization causes people to in turn identify as more extreme politically. This is addressed by Study 2.
For my section, I'll be describing Study 1, which is Misperceived Extremism in California. Study 1 tested whether citizens tend to overestimate other political views. They exaggerate self-described liberalism and conservatism. The study polled 2,444 registered voters in California between April and May of 2013 and was picked from Survey Sampling International. The drawbacks of the sample: the study only polled registered voters, so all findings were representative of voters, not citizens as a whole. Another drawback is that only voters in California were polled, so not representative of the country as a whole. Of all the polled groups, individuals were picked at random and asked sample questions. Half were asked two policy domains: one, the role of government in managing social welfare and the economy, and the trade-off between protecting the environment and protecting jobs. Both scales ranged from a 1 to 7, so respondents would put themselves between 1 and 7 with their answers. Rating the importance of each on a sliding scale: 1 to 7, 1 to 3 equals a liberal response, 4 is a moderate response, 5 to 7 is a conservative response. The other half were asked to use the same sliding scale to speculate whether they thought voters who called themselves liberal would place themselves, voters who call themselves conservatives would place themselves. Both liberal and conservative respondents significantly overestimated the extremism of both groups, as shown by the attached Table 1. Similar to the Brady and Snyder 1985 study, conservatives' misconception about liberals were the largest. But in this study, liberal and conservative respondents both overestimated the extremism of the other side. The group claiming to be moderates was actually more accurate with their assumptions. This is possibly because they are less engaged than the extreme left or right, and they are also less likely to be influenced by partisan media.
Hi everyone, I'm Lily Sheffo, and I'm going to be talking about Study 2, which is the effect of misperceived extremism on political attitudes. This is the second study that Aller did in his study, and this is meant to address the problem of the perceptual errors that were in Study 1. It is also meant to replicate the findings of Study 1 with a different population, and to see if these misperceptions have an effect on the political attitudes. So the problem we are addressing is whether or not the misperceptions that we found in Study 1 are going to happen again, and if they have an effect on political attitudes. So this study is a tell-ask study format. That's the main thing about this study, and this type of study is used when there's a widespread ignorance about what is being asked, and there are three groups. There's an ask group, a tell group, and a distort group. The ask group is asked how they would think a liberal or conservative would respond to three different stimuli. The tell group is told what they would respond to, and the distort group was given false information. So some interesting information that's also relevant is that the tell and distort group were asked if the results that were presented to them were surprising. This was mostly meant as a manipulation check for the researchers. It slowed them down, it was increasing the probability they would be misled, and they were also testing whether or not this information was new for this person or whether or not it appealed to an existing confirmation bias. Because remember, we're trying to address the problem that, we're looking back and seeing if these misperceptions are affecting political attitudes. So this is another interesting piece of information that helps us do that. Figure 2 on the right is a figure that was shown in the article, and this is how everyone reacted to what they were presented based on the stimuli that I explained earlier, which was the role of government in economic welfare, healthcare, and environmental policy and protection. D is distort, A is ask, and T is tell. So the results from the study were that the ask group reported beliefs that were significantly different from the truth, which shows that there is an increased level of misperception among the groups. Liberals and conservatives overestimate the polarization of both groups, whether or not they are in that group. That's important because that answers the question that we were trying to ask for the study. And then the tell group, did the people in the data reduce participant extremity? Yes, it did. When people knew the actual data, they were less likely to misconstrue. They were less likely to estimate that someone would be more polarized, which is what we also expected. And they averaged 8% more moderate than the ask group. This all suggests that misperception does indeed induce extreme attitudes. So before we move on to the next slide, I also want to draw attention to the very bottom row, the estimate by moderate participants. This is on table 2, which was another article. Keep in mind the results from that, and then we will talk about that in this next slide. Other than the distort group, which was 11% more extreme ideologies than the tell group, which we expected because remember they're being given false information, the moderates that were surveyed were the most accurate group. This is something else that we predicted to happen. This goes back to the 1985 study, Brady and Snyderman. And although the results in this study aren't technically statistically significant because of the low sample size, remember we did it back here, and you can see on this bottom row, the sample size is only 12. My apologies. The moderates surveyed were still the most accurate group, which is another really interesting result that we got from this experiment. So moderates were the most accurate. Misperception does affect political attitudes, and it also shows that people from both groups misattribute political polarization within their own group and also outside of groups. So now we're going to move on to Genesis, who's going to leave us with some concluding remarks and some lasting questions from the article. Thank you, guys.
Finally, in the end, the author came to multiple conclusions based on the evidence found in each study. With the evidence from Study 1, the author concluded that citizens believe that their peers are more polarized than they actually are. Moderates are the most accurate at perceiving the extremism of liberals and conservatives. Based on Study 2's evidence, the author decided that misconceptions about the extremism of the opposite party can affect an individual's political attitudes. When misperceptions are pointed out, individuals report more moderate political attitudes. Other conclusions the author made were that misperceptions of polarization appear to be self-fulfilling, meaning When a person has misconceptions about the extremism of the opposite party, they then tend to adopt extreme beliefs themselves. Compared to previous studies, the finding that liberals and conservatives tend to view each other as more extreme is distinct, or different than what other studies have found. However, this study's results confirmed previous findings that erroneous perceptions of other citizens are not only based on beliefs about the outgroup, but follow a pattern of overestimated polarization. When trying to provide reasons for the results for this study, the author concluded that the current flow of information through modern partisan media shapes the way citizens learn about politics. And also, citizens have become more sorted, which leads to easy manipulation. So, what is left to be done? The author suggests further exploration into why moderates are more perceptually accurate of the extremism of left-leaning and right-leaning citizens. As stated before, the results of the study are different than previous studies. The author suggests that researchers look into why there is a discrepancy between the findings of this study and previous studies. This might mean further research on the way information is disseminated today, or experiments with media manipulation. To figure out why citizens believe the way they do about the opposing party, the author suggests that future research looks at the effects of ideologues and residential sorting. Finally, researchers should look into finding a way to educate the public about the true distribution of public opinion. We are not as far ideologically as we think, and that is important for citizens to know.